Have you ever noticed how casually we describe ourselves? I'm not organized, I'm terrible with money, I'm too emotional, I'm not creative, I'm shy, and on and on and on. We say these things so often that after a while they stop sounding like opinions and start sounding like facts. But what if none of those sentences were ever meant to become your identity? Hi, I'm Michal, and if you're new here, welcome to my channel. This is a place where we explore what it means to be human by looking through different lenses: psychology, neuroscience, nature, ancient wisdom, astrology. Not because any one of them have all the answers, but because together they often help us understand ourselves a little better. And I think today's question is one of the most important ones we can ask. Who are you, really? I wonder how many things we believe about ourselves that we never actually chose. They were handed to us. Or maybe they were simply conclusions we reached when we were 6 years old. I'll tell you mine. Growing up, I was the creative one. My brother, he was the smart one. My mom never once said I wasn't smart, and she never told my brother that he wasn't creative. She was simply noticing what came naturally to each of us, which is a completely normal thing for a parent to do. But somewhere in my kid brain, you're the creative one quietly became, I guess I'm not smart. Years later, my brother and I were talking about this, and he told me he had done the same thing, only in reverse. If I was the creative one, that must have meant that he wasn't. So he quietly stopped reaching for things that felt artistic. Not his thing, he figured. Same house, same mom, handful of words, two completely different stories running in opposite directions. 4 years. Nobody did anything wrong. That is the most important piece here. My mom wasn't trying to put either of us into a box. She was simply making an observation. My brother and I were the ones filling in the blanks with whatever our 8-year-old brains decided belonged there. I will bet you have a version of this too. Maybe nobody ever said it out loud. Maybe it was just absorbed sideways, but somehow you built an identity around it without ever going back to ask if it was true. Here's what's fascinating. Psychologists have been studying this for decades. A psychologist named Hazel Marcus called these self-schemas. Think of them not like a file cabinet, but more like a pair of glasses that once you put them on, they begin filtering how you see yourself, what you notice, what you remember, even what you believe you're capable of. So it's not really about what happens to us. It's about the meaning we quietly attach to what happened. And then we begin treating it as a fact. Here's what this can look like. If you've had enough experiences that made you feel rejected, you might eventually stop saying that hurt and start saying, I guess I'm just someone people leave. If you were told over and over that you are too sensitive, you may eventually stop saying, I feel things deeply, and start saying, I guess I'm just too much. Same experience, two very different stories. And once you're carrying that second story, you're no longer describing yourself. You're defending an identity. Now here's where neuroscience gets really interesting. Psychologist William Swan spent years studying something called self-verification. He found that we're naturally wired to go looking for evidence that confirms what we already believe about ourselves, even when the belief isn't helping us. Because here's the thing, your brain likes consistency. Even if the story is limiting, it's familiar. And familiar often feels safer than the unknown. If your brain believes, I'm not good at public speaking, guess what? It starts looking for proof. You stumble over one word, there it is. I'm not good at this, I can't do this. Someone else gives an incredible presentation, see, that's why I don't do this. Your brain isn't trying to discover who you are, it's trying to stay consistent with who it already thinks that you are. And then I started looking at nature, because nature always has a beautiful way of explaining things without ever saying a word. Have you ever looked at a tree in winter? No leaves, no blossoms, and from the outside it looks completely dead. But we don't walk past it and think, well, I guess it's not a tree anymore. And the tree doesn't panic because it doesn't have leaves today. It doesn't decide, well, I guess I'm just a trunk now. Notice that. The tree has every reason to tell itself a story. No leaves, no blossoms, no visible proof that spring is coming, and yet the tree never turns winter into its identity. But we often do that. One disappointment, one rejection, one experience, and suddenly our brain is filling in the blanks. We turn it into our identity. I guess I'm just not creative. I guess I'm just someone people leave. The tree understands something we seem to forget. Seasons change. It doesn't confuse what it's experiencing for what it actually is. And somehow we as humans never question the tree or nature. We only question ourselves. Carl Jung had a beautiful idea about this. He believed we all develop something called a persona. The word comes from the masks that actors wore in ancient theater. Not a fake self, a functional one. A version of you that learned, this is who I have to be to belong. Jung didn't think that was a problem. He thought it was necessary. We all need a persona to move through the world. The problem isn't that the mask exists, but at some point you stop playing the role and start believing that that's who you are. And we eventually stop asking, is this really me? Or is this simply a version of me that learned how to stay safe? I think that's a question worth sitting with. So here's something I've been trying lately. Every time I catch myself saying, I'm just not organized. I'm just not good with money. I'm just not disciplined. I stop and I ask myself, is this actually true? Or is this simply a story I've been repeating long enough that it feels true? Because I think there's a lot of us walking around carrying identities that were never ours to begin with. Maybe you're not bad with money. Maybe no one ever taught you. Maybe you're not disorganized. Maybe structure simply doesn't come naturally to you, and it's a skill that you haven't practiced yet. Maybe you're not unlovable. Maybe someone who couldn't love you made you question whether you deserved it. These are all very different stories. Maybe changing your life doesn't begin by changing who you are. Maybe it begins by questioning who you think you are. Because if a story was learned, there's the possibility that a new one can be written. Next time, I want to go a layer deeper. If so much of our identity gets built through stories, where did those stories actually come from in the first place? That's what we will be exploring next. Here's today's one intention. The next time you hear yourself say, that's just how I am, stop and ask yourself, is this really true? Or is that simply an old sentence I never went back to question? One intention, one question, one small shift in awareness. Sometimes that's all it takes to begin seeing yourself differently. Thank you for stopping by. We will see you again next time. And if you liked this content, please subscribe. Bye.